call to order the Phoenix City Council meeting for July 1st, 2019. We've got two absences, but they're excused, Jim Snyder and Sarah Westover. Let's do a roll call, please.
Councilor Miller.
Here.
Councilor Warren.
Here.
Mayor Les.
Here.
Councilor Tupper.
Here.
And Councilor Baker.
Here. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance. Thank you very much. There's one presentation tonight by Carolyn Marshall from the Phoenix, First Phoenix Community Center. Come on up, Caroline. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank
right.
you so much. It's going to be under 10 minutes, you know for sure.
You set yourself up last time.
Oh, I do, and thank goodness.
Caroline made a comment a couple meetings ago that all presentations should be limited to 10 minutes.
Well,
That's
not just a
agenda for
comment, but I'm
presentation.
asking that you ask that of your people, because an hour-long presentation, and then we got to go through the stuff you guys got to go through? Oh, my God.
I started the clock.
Oh, good. I'm ready. She showed me the clock when we came in here and practiced a little, so, or I gave her the video. So I
That's
just
enough.
want
Keep
to...
going, please.
I'm getting a gavel, Chris, and you better watch out. Okay, so really essentially what this is a thank you. I really appreciate the fact that we were given this grant, and it was really well spent, and we have all the numbers before you. I gave them away, so I don't have them anymore. But we served Thanksgiving dinner. We served 2 dinners in December, and we collaborated with the City of Phoenix and the Phoenix Chamber to have a really wonderful Christmas tree lighting. And it was fantastic and a whole lot of fun. And I think the money was well spent, and I just love doing this. And as hard as the stuff as we do sometimes, at the end of the day, we get to have dinner, and we get to light a Christmas tree in town and invite people in, and it's a wonderful thing. And one of the things I wanted to talk about the Christmas tree lighting before I show the video and then I'm done is and they're not here, are they? Oh, geez. I don't know what well, anyway, the newsletter. I really enjoyed Chris's, I really enjoyed the newsletter, and I assumed, which you know what that means, that he would put the Christmas tree lighting in his newsletter before the Christmas tree lighting came out. Well, you know, it was fall, and he wasn't thinking about the Christmas tree lighting, and then his other one was after the Christmas tree lighting, and it didn't happen. So I really like the fact that we can now submit dates to the new letter. And I couldn't get any of the news channels to come and cover our Christmas tree lighting last year, nor could I get Tony Boone to come and write about it. But maybe that'll change this year, because it's going to be here at the Civic Center, and that'll be a little more exciting, and that's what I hope for. Because it was a little, I made assumptions, which was dumb, and then the other venues wouldn't allow me to do it. But otherwise, we still had a really good turnout, and it was still a lot of fun, and I just want to thank you so much for that. And we've got a little video for you, and you get to see how much fun we had. And take it away. I'm not pushing that. Something could happen.
Action.
Do you guys see it, or you guys are going to have to turn around? Oh, on your screens. musicians, they're worth $100, man. When they come
That-
and help sing
that
it
was
along,
great.
that's another really good thing. Isn't that beautiful?
That was
Thank
great.
you.
I
Very
love
nice.
it.
The food was excellent.
Yes, and that's our promise. We're gonna bring the cookies and the coffee and the cocoa, and I'll bring 2 volunteers to help you all out, for sure.
Right. Next up on the agenda is public comments. We only have 2. This kind of dovetails with one thing on the consent agenda, and that's for the YMCA to utilize the Civic Center. Come on up, guys. We have Brad and Gary speak to us. Just introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Brad Russell. I'm the director of the Rogue Valley Family YMCA.
And I'm Gary Taylor, the Associate Executive Director of the Rogue Valley Y. I've been working with Aaron and Kim Berlin for the last couple of months now.
Yep.
So I just really wanted to come and thank all of you and the staff and Gary for working on some additional programming right here in Phoenix. So really looking forward to that. Just as a quick review, in Southern Oregon, there are YMCA's in Ashland, Medford, Grants Pass, and Klamath Falls. And so for us, we refer to ourselves as the Rogue Valley Family YMCA because it's Phoenix, Medford, Central Point, Eagle Point, and that's our area. There's a brand new executive director that started today at the Ashland YMCA, and we're very excited about him because he was our YMCA of the USA Regional Resource Director. So he's really, I think, going to add a lot, and we already have a great relationship with him. So I think there's just a lot of goodness all the way around, and I just wanted to come and say thank you. Anything you want to share about the
Just to share that I think our
details?
partnership together, it's a part of the consent agenda later tonight, but it's really that the Y would bring evening, Monday through Thursday, fitness classes to Phoenix using this center, leaving the center available Monday through Thursday for daytime use groups and Friday, Saturday, Sunday groups as well. And the way that we're going to kind of share in that partnership is the Y will provide some on-site staffing on those days that can answer the phone, help with some scheduling, help kind of keep the center alive with the AmeriCorps position timing out. So I think together it'll be a great way to engage the community and see if we get more folks coming through and doing something active. I think the one part I would share that's in there is kind of the measure of success is that are more Phoenix residents doing something active, and that's what we'll have to try to track over the next few months and see if that.
It's just
really
that
happens.
simple. Just more folks being more active, right? More committed to a good, healthy lifestyle. That's it.
Cool. We don't normally have Q&A during the public comment,
Oh.
but you're on the consent agenda. I just want to go around the table, just see if anyone has any questions for the YMCA folks with regards to the item on the consent agenda. Stuart?
What kind of fitness activities?
So we're still working through the exact classes, but we did a survey in partnership with the city, so we have an idea of what people are looking for kind of in the top 5 list. But then we're really trying to work with both our Medford YMCA schedule and the Ashland YMCA schedule to make sure that we're offering different things or not offering Zumba at the same time, things like that. But
In addition to the other activities that are happening, right? We believe very much in a cooperative model. We're not interested in competing, being a nonprofit. So we just want to make sure that it fits together with the other things that are being offered in town.
It's a 6-month trial. If it works out, great. If not, we can change things along the way, but
exactly.
it's a good idea. Great. Nobody else? We okay? All right, thanks, guys.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. So with that said, we do have the consent agenda up next. And does anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda for further discussion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I was on public comments too.
You have 8C next to your name.
Well, there was one above it. It's about the public comments.
Okay,
4, which is public comments.
that's fine. Let me take care of this motion, and then
Okay,
we'll
sure,
bring it back up,
absolutely.
okay? But in the box, there's an 8C by C, the smaller.
Sorry.
That's all right, that's
My
fine.
writing
Oh,
is
that's-
atrocious.
That's okay.
We know.
We're easy. So all those in favor? Did I already do it?
Aye.
Any opposed? Did I already say that? All right, so the consent agenda passes unanimously. Come on up, Caroline, we'll bring things out of order, but it's fine. Get to 3 minutes, okay? All right, thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
My name's Caroline Marshall. I live at 142 West Bowles Road. And I just wanted to, well, first of all, dinner's July 11th, chili burgers. I just want to put it to the council, when we do have a question about what's happening, how do we have a conversation? And we're not going to do it right now because we don't do it in 3 minutes, but when you do have a question about something, do we ask the city attorney, do we ask Aaron, who do we go to about different things? Because sometimes, we're in here and we can't really get the answer, and we ask the question, but we don't get the answer, so how do we get that? And maybe one or all of you could get back to me about that. One of the questions that we asked was, how was the decision made to turn off the live stream? Who made the decision? Is it important? Whatever. And I don't need to hear now, but, it'd be good to find out. In the public comments, it says that if you move the consent agenda, unless someone has asked to talk about it, then they'll pull that and they'll talk about it. And I had asked to talk about one of the consent agenda items last time, and we didn't do that. We went straight into the budget, and then, of course, we were here till 10, and we didn't do that. So that was something that happened. And I want to say to all of you right now, what great work you're doing and how hard you are and what hard decisions you've had to make. And it's been amazing how graceful you are to each other, and I'm very impressed by that. And some hard questions were asked and some difficult things were said, and yet everybody remained graceful and kind, and I'm just very impressed with you. And thank goodness they don't live stream our budget meetings at the community center and at the session, because you should see us. I mean, I have such compassion for you guys. Oh my gosh. And we're trying to figure stuff out, and you guys are doing it, and everybody's watching and commenting, and wow, I think it's amazing. And I'm just going to end by saying that I have this deck of cards that I work with. It's about groups and how we work together. And tonight, before I came over here, I pulled good faith assumptions. And it's assuming others' good intent. And I assume that you guys have good intent, and I appreciate all you're doing. And that includes you, Kimberly, and you, Aaron, and you, Doug, who I can never remember your name, thank God for the name. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Every city council meeting is live streamed. There's recordings of every single meeting, including work sessions, just to let you know. And if you have questions, typically during public comment, we'll let people know that if you have a question, typically you want to go to the city manager. And he's sort of at the tip of the iceberg here, and he can delegate and send you over to the public works director or to the city manager for more questions, or you can come directly to a city councilor or the mayor for a question if you'd like to. Okay? And when it comes to the consent agenda, that's on there for the city council members to pull an item from the consent agenda, not the audience.
Well, it
So-
says audience, right? It says,
Yeah. But maybe it's a misprint, but it's,
staff, council, and public.
yeah, but it should be just for the council to pull an agenda, so that has to be changed. Okay? Onward and upward here, we're on to new business, 8A. It's resolution number 1040, resolution revising order rates pursuant to ordinance number 639 and superseding resolution number 820 and 833. I've had some discussion with staff as to whether we want to have a formal presentation or not. I know most of the information is in the packet I think we need, but I want to turn to staff and ask you guys, first of all, if staff wants to make a presentation, then I'll turn to council and see if they want a further presentation, okay?
I think the information in the packet is pretty self-explanatory, but we do have a couple of people here that can answer some additional questions. There was also a presentation that was emailed out to the council with some further clarification, but I don't have anything specific I'd like to add.
Okay. We do have some presenters here if council wants to bring them up for a presentation before we go into deliberations. And I just want to check with council and see how you feel about
Has
it.
anything changed? I remember you from before, you did a good job, and you told us,
So
is anything different?
the presentation is now more on the financial piece and in a little more depth and more tables and background. And Catherine Hansford is here if you want her to present it. She's the financial analyst on this matter.
How about just it's like a 30,000 foot view.
You got 1 minute. Just kidding.
I could go through the slides pretty quick.
It's up to council. I'm okay without a presentation. If you got one presentation, we can do it.
Yeah, if you don't mind,
I see some nodding in the head, so why don't you come on up?
that'd be great.
Thank you, Catherine.
Can I just hit the button and you should do it?
And why don't you start with your name and organizations we have for the record, okay?
Yes, good evening. My name is Catherine Hansford. I'm with Hansford Economic Consulting, and I was a sub-consultant to RH2 Engineering for the master plan. So every master plan has to have a financial chapter in it. So they had me do that chapter.
Thanks, Catherine.
Sorry, I don't know. Did I do it right?
No, you're fine, but,
Well, that concludes our presentation for this evening.
Minutes up.
I can't find the arrow on here. I can see it on the screen, but I don't see it on the computer.
Well, we could do it the other way too. We don't have to have it on the, we can just do it that way. Okay. I shouldn't have messed with it.
It's very,
If you have, does everyone have a copy of the presentation? I can also
Everyone was
just,
emailed a copy of the presentation.
oh, here we go. Okay, I'm not going to mess with trying to go to full screen here. Okay, so, okay. So as I mentioned,
Catherine, let me stop for 1 second. Do you want
Yeah.
questions during your presentation, or do you want to wait till the end?
I am happy to take them at any time.
Okay,
You-
great.
You
Thank
can either ask me then, or you can wait.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right.
So, as I said, I'm part of the Water Master Plan team. This is part of state law that master plans have to be updated frequently and that they are required to have a financial analysis with it. Why we're looking at fee increases now? Well, largely because of what's in the Water Master Plan. And just as a reminder, the Water Fund is what's called a enterprise fund, meaning that it has to fund itself. It's not going to be taking money from the general fund. It has to be self-sufficient. And the revenues, 98% of the revenues in that fund come from charging fees. So that's why it's so important. So in this financial analysis, we found that there are some both immediate and long-term needs for the city, and that does necessitate increasing both the monthly water rates and what's called the system development charges, and that's what new development pays. I'm just very briefly going to go over these two tables just to kind of give an order of magnitude of what kind of cost the city is looking at. In total, the master plan identifies just over $22 million worth of improvements. That is through build-out, so that's a long time period. Within the next 20 years, looking at about just over $15 million. So it's a fairly large magnitude of dollars that we're talking about. And what the analysis does is it then allocates of that total cost, how much of it is really being driven by existing customers and their needs, and how much of it's being driven by new growth, development, and their needs. And that's those two different columns there, existing and future. And it says recovery by rates or by SDCs. So if they are projects that are of benefit to the existing customers, then that cost will be recovered through rates. And if it's of benefit to future development, that cost is recovered through the system development charges. Okay, so first, looking at the system development charges, there's a total of $8.1 million that's identified as being their responsibility to pay for. And so something that's a little bit different when we look at the financial analysis, we want to be very conservative. We want to make sure that we're not being too rosy about how much development's going to occur in the next few years. We need to be more conservative. So the master plan looks at what would be the peak uses, what's the most we need to be planning for, and on the other hand, the financial side is kind of the other side of, well, what if that doesn't happen? So what we did was we took the average between the average and the low range of projection in the master plan for the financial analysis. The fees follow the city's ordinance methodology that spells out how you should calculate these fees. So we didn't stray from that, with the exception of one thing. I'll just finish that up on the next slide, actually. So the SDCs include two components. There's a reimbursement fee and an improvement fee. And 95% of the fee for this city is for improvements. There's the reimbursement component is how much the new development's buying into that is already, the infrastructure that's already in the city, and there's not much involved with that, but there's a lot involved with the improvements. Okay, so for the SDCs, the one difference I mentioned on the last slide is that your current SDC fees don't follow what's called the American Water Works Association Industry Standards ratios. It's a different set of ratios, and I don't know the history of how that was developed, but I do recommend that you conform to industry standards. It's very defensible and logical, and you can show people how that is derived. What this analysis found was that the fee per ERU, that's like a typical home in the city, should go up. But that the fees for the larger size meters, so if you have usually more of a commercial type development or retail store, they're going to have a larger size water meter, that those fees would actually go down because the ratio between the small meter and the larger size meters is less under the industry standards than what the city currently has. So that's the only real difference between what you currently have and what's proposed in the resolution. Okay, and then on the water rates, the difference here with the water rates, you saw on the SDCs, it takes the total cost through build out and divides that amongst the total growth that's anticipated. In the rates, we only look at the 10-year horizon. Things change rapidly. You'll have another master plan out soon, or things change. Maybe you get a nice grant and you can put that towards costs. But things typically change within a 5 to 10-year time frame or sooner. So this just looks at the next 10 years for the CIP. And what I did was look at how much could you afford to pay for just with cash? And that means both what you might have in reserves and what you collect monthly from customers. And the analysis found that there's a lot of costs that you just cannot carry using your cash. You're going to have to debt fund at some point in time. So almost 60% of the costs would need to be debt funded, even with a rate increase that's proposed. Specifically, there's 3 projects that I think would need to be debt funded. Again, plans change over a few years. You might juggle things around and it might be a different project that you end up debt funding, but in how it's modeled currently, there's a pipeline, the T1 pipeline, that's all existing customers would have to pay for that. And then there's a storage tank and a new connection with the Medford Water Commission. Those 2 projects would be shared between existing and future customers. An important thing to notice, though, to note with any debt service, if it's being paid for partially by the system development charges, is that the revenues from the ratepayers need to be able to cover all the debt service, because you may not have the development come in as you projected. So that's another reason why rates need to stay at a certain level, so that there's sufficient padding with that, what they call the debt service coverage. It's wonderful when you have that development occur as you projected and the revenues come in, But if you, or the whole country goes into an economic cycle where things slow down, then the padding has to be there. Otherwise, you can't make the debt service payments. So that's an important note, and that is written in the master plan chapter. Another thing that's included in the rate increase is that I think you can put about $800,000 aside in the next 10 years for these two large projects. And the reason why I think that you should do that is because that can lower then your financing charges on any debt that you either issue or you get a loan from the state, however it's actually funded, but just trying to reduce that amount of financing charges. So over the next 5 years, the average increase each year is 3.5% to 4% for just for operating expenses. That's running the system, that's labor increases, that's your typical supplies, costs, everything goes up over time. So a good chunk of what's proposed in the rate increase is simply to keep things running as they are, keep up with it. The other portion is to cash fund that CIP, and that's the impact of the master plan. So then another thing that has to be balanced in the rate study is how much money do you keep in the bank, so to speak, in case you have an emergency or in case cash flow didn't come in as you expected because perhaps you have a bad drought and you have to cut back, and perhaps sometimes the state will impose a new regulation and you have to conform with that. So you need to make sure there's some money available for that. You have about 4 months in operating expenses currently. That's very reasonable. You're a small city. You don't have any major asset risks. And so I just made sure that in the projection you're going to stay between 3 and 5 months of operating expenses. It will increase a little bit, at least it's projected to, but that's going to get drawn down when you start paying some debt service. Here is just a graphic showing how the water fund cash balance might go, is projected to go. And you can see that sharp dip there in 2029. That's when that new debt service would begin. There is a recommendation that you hold off on those two projects until your current debt service is retired. That frees up, it helps in a couple of ways. Obviously, it helps with being able to make the debt service payment. It also helps with that debt service coverage ratio, which all the lending agencies are looking for. The other important thing with the rate study portion is that I was looking at what is the water usage pattern in the city? Are you achieving your goals? And looking at the maximum demand day to average day demand, what's called the peaking factor, has not been improving in the city. And this is an important measure because if your peaking goes up, it means that you're planning for the peaks all the time. You're looking at more infrastructure, more cost to buy the water from Medford. And so that's something you want to work toward bringing down and not letting it keep creeping up. So because of that, there is a recommendation to either increase the cost of that top tier or go towards a more seasonal type of pricing structure. What it does is it does shift cost to non-residential users from who's currently paying. But if you look at the graph, you can see why. The institutional users have a very high peaking ratio, and that's really the customer group you want to be sending the signal to. So that's a reason why you would have that shift. This table shows what the proposed rates are. Proposed rates are a 5.25% annual increase. That's sort of a global increase. But what does change here is that the Tier 4 ratio compared to the Tier 3, it's a bigger ratio. So like I said, those large peak users would pay more for their water than they currently do. Here's a projection of a residential bill at 7,500 gallons a month. This is what the state looks at when they look at what kinds of funding they can provide to you. They're looking for affordability, what they consider to be a reasonable amount for a household to pay each month. So currently, a bill would be $42.34 at this level. Under the proposed rates, that would go to $42.55 in the first year, and you can see going up gradually then each year after that. The rates are currently right at what the state considers to be a good, not a good, an affordable level, and also what their expectation is. If your rates were lower, they actually would not provide you as advantageous terms as they do at the level you're at. So I think it's in the report. I think it was $42 and something, 41, it was just under $42 that's like the threshold for where they could provide you more advantageous terms. So it's right where you want to be with the state. And then this graph was just to show you with the proposed rates, how that would affect a commercial customer. I tried to pick a fairly typical commercial customer, and you can see in the non-peaking season, the bills are about the same. They're a little bit higher, and then in the summertime, you can see that the bills would be a little bit higher. So that's what I have. And any questions?
Councilors?
That was great.
Can you just talk a little bit about why having a higher base rate lends stability to your income stream as opposed to having a lower base rate and higher rates in the upper tiers, and how that adds instability because of seasonal fluctuations, the weather, maybe a couple of top tier users leave the city. So just talk about how, on the Water Rate Commission a couple years ago, we wanted to have 85% of the income coming in be stable from the base rate, 50% from water usage.
Yeah.
Can you hit that a little bit for me?
Yeah, and that was very much a direction probably about 10 years ago, was to try and shift more of the cost recovery into the use rates so that people would really understand more about the water they were using, and it would send a stronger price signal. But what happened is we went into drought period 2015, 2016, and a lot of cities really suffered from having that type of a rate structure. So there's been a shift industry-wide, not just Oregon, not just West Coast, but industry-wide, to rethinking that. When you have more of your cost recovered in the base charge, it does provide a lot more stability to the city, both for the reasons you cited, weather. It helps a lot with cash flow. So when you have plans being made, what to buy in which months, chemicals and so forth, then there's a little bit more predictability there for the city and staff. And like I said, in drought periods as well, if you have more being recovered from a base charge, you're less likely to be looking at things like drought surcharges. And people typically are not very keen on drought surcharges. They're being asked to use less and asked to pay more. So that's a situation, if you can avoid, that's preferable.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else before we let Catherine go?
I had a quick question on slide 12. So if I'm reading this right, the majority of the increase is all operating cost, is that right?
Yeah, a large
Vast
part, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And
so
then-
just over 1% goes to advancement, okay.
Yeah, that's right. And even, but like I said, even with a 5.25% rate increase each year, you're not going to have enough to cash fund all the projects. It's still, at some point, you're going to have to be looking at some debt funding.
Cool,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm going to open up to council discussion. We're going to talk about the resolution, if you'd like, don't have to, but who wants to go first, if anybody? Okay.
I think it'd be wise for us to go with option B personally. I'd like to see us address water conservation a little more seriously than we have been in the past. I think we're gonna see some dramatic decreases in water availability over the next 20 years, and I think getting a leg on it now would be a good option for us.
Give me your reasons, answers. Water availability in Rogue Valley will change,
Yeah, it's gonna go down.
okay? And the second reason?
What's that?
You had two reasons why you thought that having lower base rate and higher tiered rates would be better.
I'm not arguing that point. I'm arguing that we need to address water conservation more
Con-
seriously. than we have
conservation.
been. See if we can drop that peak usage down, especially with our top tier users.
How would you like to do that?
Well, I think option B is from what I can gather, makes the most sense, as far as just not sticking it to some one person in particular. I think kind of spreads it across the board a little bit more. But it does raise that tier 4 rate up considerably. And when you raise up those rates, people will be a little more conscious of how much they're using.
But you'd still want to, we're still keeping the same base rate on the charge, just changing the tiers is what you're proposing.
No, I'm just saying option B, which is the option that they presented to us here. So that, the base rate would stay the same.
A seasonal rate
But this-
structure.
Yeah, it's more of a seasonal rate structure for sure.
Staff did recommend option A, so I'm going to have staff talk to that in just a moment, but
Sure.
I'm going to comment on it a little bit, but anybody else have any comments? Conserving water is a double-edged sword. If everyone starts to conserve water, what happens to the income that comes in to our water fund? It goes down. If everyone decides to have a no lawns and just have water tolerant plants in the yard, usage goes down and we don't have enough income coming in. So the problem or the risk with having high tiered rates is that people do cut back on using their water, period, and you don't get the same income coming in versus a higher base rate like we talked about earlier. It does add stability to the water fund.
Like you said
But-
earlier, though, if we keep the base rate to cover that cost,
Yep.
we're covered, right? Are we in the business of making money as a city, or are we in the business of providing services?
Not making money, but paying for the services.
If we are able to get water usage down, then
Yeah.
we'll have to provide less.
Yeah, and I'm not that far against it because the base rate isn't being reduced, right? But sometimes you will find a conservation plan does lower the amount of use in the city, and then we don't have the amount of income that we thought we'd have come in. But staff recommended A. Why don't you speak to why you recommended option A, if you would?
It's more difficult to implement and to bill with different peaks, like off-peak and peak. That's one of the reasons is administratively, it's going to be much more difficult to set that up in our software and our system. And then the impact to the customer, if you look at the graph, is minimal to the average person. So I think in year one, the difference is on a typical bill is about 11 cents. Year two, the difference is 12 cents. So, it may or may not have a conservation effect. If it does, then those rates may go down, the difference may be smaller, and we might not collect as much, but administratively, it's much more difficult to implement.
So, just so I guess I understand how our software program works a little bit more clearly. Is someone having to go through and look at every single bill and align those, or are these bills being printed off and then sent to distributed?
We're going to have to do two different, fee schedules, I guess you could say, and we're going to have to change that. twice a month. Basically change the way the entire system bills accounts.
Then twice a year, right? Change it twice a year?
Well, based on the peak and off-peak.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll have to do that twice.
Not twice a month, though. you said.
No, I'm sorry. Did I say twice a month? I meant
Yeah.
twice a year. I'm
Twice a
sorry.
year.
Yeah, twice a year. I mean, it can be done, but it will be very time-consuming. We don't have to go through each one of the bills and manually do it. What we have to do is set the rates in the system for each tier, depending on how they change. And, it's not impossible. It's just easier to do option A. And then the flip side of it is whether or not it will have an impact if we did option B, and how significant that impact would be. And then, if it was significant, it might actually lower the amount of revenue that comes in. But, it's just you can pick A or B.
One more question, Aaron.
Mhm.
You said it's gonna, be time consuming. How much more time do you think that would take per month? Or like, so every time you switched it, for example?
Each time that we switched it, I would say it's probably going to take at least 2 full business days. So you're looking at 2 people, 16 hours, 32 hours total. And that's just kind of a wild guess, But I'm guessing it's going to take at least 2 days to go through the system and change. Oh, if you can, sure, that'd be great. Thank you, Catherine.
So typically, I'm not sure which billing software package you use, but so typically when cities implement a different rate structure like this, there's an upfront cost of usually about $20,000 or so, working with the software provider then they put all that program in. Like Aaron said, there's not staff checking each one, but there is an upfront cost associated with it, and it's not all just city staff and time, but it would also be with your software provider, so that's...
Does 20,000 twice a year?
No, that's just a one-time cost to set up the new code for the software.
Got it.
And then if I could just add a little something on Aaron's comment, you're not really sure how much conservation you're getting. I think that's true with your majority of your customers. I think about 85% are single-family residential. There's not going to be much impact there. It's really with those institutional users, because they're the ones in the summertime really driving that peak. So the model is structured that you shouldn't be losing revenue by going to that rate structure, but the customers it's going to hit the hardest are your large users. It's not really going to be the residential. It does encourage them to do more watering outside of the peak period, because there's not a tier 3 and a tier 4 in the non-peak season. But I think a very large part of it was really that cost and administrative time.
But whether they use water off in the non-peak season versus peak season, I don't think Home Depot has a choice. They're gonna have a lot of plants inside their store, and they have to water. And doesn't matter whether it's peak season or off-peak season, they're gonna water the plants. Bear Lake Estates is one of our largest water users, and they gotta water the lawns and work on the pool, and they're gonna water the lawns and keep them green, whether it's peak or off-peak. I don't think people in the industrial sector are gonna look and go, is it peak season or not peak season? Okay, water less plants or water less lawn. I think they're gonna do what they need to do what they do for the business, whether it's peak or off-peak. Just that one comment. Okay, thank you. Angie, did you have a question?
I'm just wondering on option A versus option B, do you feel there would be a downplay in revenue off of that? Do you think if we did option B for the industrial side, do you think that would cut into that bottom dollar more than option A?
Putting you on the spot.
Sorry, yeah, back up.
I don't think so.
Okay.
It is structured to, the model accounts for it. It's a hard question, honestly. I don't know what reactions are like here, and I'm not very familiar with your large users here in the city, so I think you would probably actually have a better feel for how much they might cut back. just from experience and from a sort of professional standpoint, yes, I think option B would encourage more water conservation. It really should. However, it's weighing that decision of administrative cost and programming cost, and majority of your customers are not going to see much difference. It's really those large users. So, yeah.
Thank you.
One more question before you run off. Do you think that going to option B would cover those administrative increases?
I'm sorry, could you say?
Would, if option B in the model you created here, would that cover the increase in administrative costs?
It did not include it, so yeah, I mean, you've got enough of a reserve that you could spend some of that reserve and not be putting the fund in jeopardy. So you could, but it is not modeled in the financial analysis.
Thank you.
Now that I think about it, I bet the large water users will continue to be large water users, whether it's a tiered system or, a higher tier rate or not. Home Depot's gonna water no matter what, and they're one of our largest water users, and they're gonna pay a higher rate. It'll increase revenue in the fund. It's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna conserve water, it might. And Bear Lake Estates are gonna keep the water, the lawns green. Other higher end users in the city who are doing well financially and already pay high water bills, I don't think going from a $200 water bill to $225 is gonna really matter to them. No. It's my 2 cents.
I think we'll also influence some people to do different plantings in their yards and start, making changes to how they use water. I think the savings, if you look at it over time, will make sense to them. Yeah, like you said, I think there's going to be, some water users have to use water, right? That's, car wash, you can't do without water.
Yeah.
So that cost, they're not going to eat that cost, right? That's going to increase the cost of washing your car.
And the rent at the Bear Lake Estates and all of that, doesn't cover in the wash.
But see, they can at least adjust their landscaping just by high usage during peak season.
But it's the residents that use up that water on their landscapes, and they'll just jack the rent on a bunch of people on fixed income, the rent goes up. I think personally that I'm all about conserving water, I'm all for that, but given the intense budget dialogue we've been experiencing lately, I'm really nervous about the upfront cost to implementing the whole program. And I think if we'd like to revisit it in a year and talk about restructuring the tier system, that's fine. But for right now, this budget cycle, let's just ride a wave of joy for a little while and get past the time, get past what we've been going through. That's all I'm saying. I'd be more for number A or letter A.
I don't believe we're set up to, as far as the software, the upgrades. I don't know if we're in a position to take care of that.
Questions from anybody else? I see that. Anybody else? Let's go.
May I just add on to what Terry was saying too, that,
And give us your name for the record.
sorry,
because-
Rachel Lanigan with RH2 Engineering. Is this okay to interject?
Please.
Okay. The water management and conservation plan that we just recommended, if I remember correctly, we included looking at a tiered rate structure to promote conservation as one of your goals over the next 5 years. So that does assume you will come back and look at it in the next few years. So
I don't have
that
a
was part
problem
of it.
looking at it even a year from now, but I think right now,
And it's already tiered to some extent, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, I don't want to continue discussion. There's no more to discuss. I'll entertain a motion. From anybody. Except
I
for the
move
audience
to
members.
approve resolution 1040, setting water rates pursuant of ordinance number 639 and superseding resolution number 883.
A second.
Is there more discussion? Okay. It's going to call the question. Roll call.
Council Warren,
Yes.
Council Crawford,
Yes.
Council Baker,
Yes.
and Council Vermillion.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Good discussion, very healthy. Next up on the agenda is item 8B, resolution number 1041, resolution revising water SDCs pursuant to ordinance number 990. I'm gonna ask for staff input to begin with, okay? If you have any.
Sure. I think that the presentation kind of spoke for itself, so I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Council discussion.
I think we have to talk about how big of an increase it is. I support it, but I think that's, like Terry said, we've had some pretty intense budget conversations the last month or so, and this is a dramatic increase. At this point, we don't have much buildable lands left in town for new, meters to be going in. But once we do, if we ever get across the other side of the freeway, that's gonna definitely increase the cost to those developers or individuals. And also this will impact the ability for us to do more affordable housing in town. But I am for the increase.
Okay. Any more discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve resolution number 1041, revising water SDCs pursuant to ordinance number 900.
I second.
Angie seconds. Any more discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call, please.
Counselor Warren?
Yes.
Counselor Crawford?
Yes.
Counselor Baker?
Yes.
Counselor Vermillion?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you attending.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is item 9A. It's a first reading by title only of ordinance 1005, an ordinance of the City of Phoenix adopting amendments to chapter 3.16 of the municipal code, second reading and public hearing on July 15th.
You can do the community newsletter?
It's under.
I'm sorry, I missed it. Maybe that was a Freudian slip. Okay, sorry about that. Let's back up a little bit, go to item 8C, community newsletter discussion. The one person signed up to speak on the newsletter, but she is not here.
Oh. Somebody's coming.
Well, I asked for this to be put on the agenda. I saw I read the newsletter, came out, it was very nice. I enjoyed reading it. The only problem I had with the newsletter is that I received notification that a particular member of the community was asked not to participate in any of the meetings with the newsletter group. And I felt it wasn't appropriate for somebody or a group that is getting together to utilize city resources to exclude members of the community, whether it be a counselor, Vermillion, or Stewart, or Terry Baker, or Crawford. I just didn't feel that it was okay to exclude certain people from the discussion. If it's a private newsletter, if it's Stuart Warren, Fly Fishing Weekly, or Tony Chavez, Vehicle Pinstriping Monthly newsletter, that's fine, it's a private newsletter. When it comes to spending public funds, I think we should allow members of the community to participate without excluding any individuals. And I felt that if you're a liaison to a particular group, that you should let the group know, hey, you can't exclude people in the community. It has to be open and transparent. That was thought number one. Thought number two, I would love to be in the loop as far as the putting together the newsletter and the rough drafts, so I can see what I should or should not put into my mayor's newsletter. Whether it's dovetailing upon something that's already in there, and I'm repeating something that's already in there, I kind of want to be in the loop and get information so I can make my mayor's newsletter fit in appropriately. Those were my two requests with regards to the newsletter, and that's why I brought it up for discussion today. And that was it.
I'm happy to respond to that. One of our community members asked for the mayor to not attend our meetings.
I happen to be the committee member.
Well, no, it's fine. I mean, I totally, when we talked about this before, I told you we'd have to talk about it,
Yeah.
right? So that community member thought that the mayor's disrupted the meetings, and he did not want to participate if the mayor was included in the conversation. And so I told the mayor that he was not invited to meetings, even though we haven't had one in quite a while at this point. We've been doing everything just via email. was allowed to add input, and I would bring that to the board, and we would consider it and go from there. And so we are not technically a public, group, right? So we don't have to follow public meetings law. We're not determining where funds are going, right? We were set with creating a newsletter, and that's what we've done. If you guys want to open that up to conversation and so that everyone's allowed, happy to do that.
Let me turn to our attorney for a little bit, because we are, a group here in town is determining how to spend, well, the content of the newsletter, which is using public money. Should the meetings be public and open up to people who want to participate, because it is public funds they're spending? And should I know that the email should be public record anyway, right? So, what do you think about the emails being public record and having access to any email that's in the process or the meetings and participation?
Whether, and I haven't looked at this, so wasn't asked before this, so I hadn't thought about it, about how you'd characterize your committee. It's a committee, it's a meeting if it's a group or a person for that matter that is assigned to come back and provide information to the group in order for it to make a decision. That would typically, again, I don't have my rules out in front of me and I have to look, but that's how I recall how you would use that criteria. Is this group or committee going to have an effect and a decision, or have some kind of effect on a decision by the council? And whether or not a group of people that are writing a city letter, I don't know that they would necessarily fit within. I'd have to look at that. Okay, so I'll do that. As to your emails, whether those are subject to public record, essentially any document, communication, written communication that any of you do that's related to public business would be open to public records law. So if city council person's involved in writing an article in the newspaper or this pamphlet, and they're talking to each other about what that's going to say, or you're giving drafts of that letter, and you're using the email to, essentially function as providing some kind of information to the public, that would be a public record in my mind.
And just so everyone's aware, I'm using my city email, so it's going to be public record no matter what.
Right. It could be public record, right. But even if you were using it on your own, that's a fear I have, or any attorney has for their group, is you could be using it on your private computer, and if you're doing city business on your private computer, then that's subject to public record. So you have to be careful. Sorry. Yeah. So I mean, if you, yeah, I'm looking at, he just gave me an eye opener, but yeah, no, I'm not too concerned. I mean, we've gone over that. But if you have questions about that, please. But as far as whether or not with this meeting, I might have to ask some more questions about all the members of the group, what they're actually doing. But if it's just a
Mr. Mayor, may I tell you?
You may. Let me make one more comment to Doug's comment. I'm going to come to you, I promise. So Doug, just get specific. So if a rough draft of a newsletter is sent to a city councilor email, and I were to ask for to be copied on that email that comes in each time the newsletter is being written, it is public information. Can I simply, I know I can simply ask for it, but I would hope not to have to do a public records request amongst the city councilors. I mean,
I'm happy to send it to you. I printed one out and gift to everybody every time.
No, but it was almost done. I'd like to, before I do my mayor's news corner, I'd like to get the rough draft of the newsletter, which I like, by the way. But I want to make things in my news corner, what I'd like to put in there based on the rest of the newsletter and not overlap on what's there and make it pertinent, but not,
I'll even do one better. We're gonna
Yeah.
give you a list 2 months before yours is even due of what's gonna be in it.
I'm just looking for the rough draft before I put my stuff in there.
Probably not gonna have that available by that time. Would imagine.
But your rough draft would still be a public record.
Right.
If you published, if you published, the other person said, this is what I was going to say, and you had some things you wanted to say in there,
So I
and you decided to take them out later, yeah, that public record is still a public
I
record.
can simply request that I be copied on the emails that go back and forth.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that would be public record.
Okay, thank you.
So just to kind of maybe clarify, and I'm not sure what Counselor Warren has in mind for the future. There's been one meeting, and I actually ran that meeting. It was a quick meeting because Stuart was gone, and we needed to get going on the newsletter. But basically, that meeting was just to kind of reel everybody in, because I heard that people had different ideas of what they wanted in there, and I needed to explain to them that they're using public money, and it needs to be a newsletter that's appropriate for the funds being used. So it was a brief meeting. I don't know if they plan on having any more. I understand, this is the way I understand the newsletter to go. There's very specific sections. So like, for example, there's the Chamber of Commerce. So they present me an article. I cut and paste and plop it in there. We have the Civic Center, where I write the article and pop it in there because I run the Civic Center. We have volunteer section, and I handle the volunteers. So again, someone sends something to me, or I plop something in there. It's all basic stuff. There's like a section for highlights. There's a section for like all the different committees and commission groups. And then there's the mayor section in there.
Yeah.
My understanding of what's happening is, like, for example, I email the chamber and say I need something to go in there. I email Braylon and I said I need something for the Civic Center to go in there. I email Sharon from B-City and said, hey, I have a spot for you to do a community highlight. So those are the emails that are kind of going back and forth, at least from my perspective. They're not actual meetings, they're just requests of articles that go in there. And so that's what's transpired so far. That's it.
I would say that all those items are public records that you're receiving or you're transmitting, and I would not, what you're describing to me hasn't reached a public meeting for me. It's more a staff kind of operations. Now, if you've assigned a group of people to come up and make a policy about what this newsletter is going to do, what it's going to say, how it's going to do it, and how that's described, and not necessarily the content. You're not looking at individual items of content, but you're talking about, we want this kind of message that goes out, and those type of things. You're involving city council. Your city council sends someone out there to get that ball rolling. I would have to look to see if that's public meeting. It could be.
So we basically have 3 people, myself included, and Tony and Charlotte, who are acting as like an editorial board.
Sure.
And so it's, once we finished the final draft, it went out to
Yeah, no.
those 3.
Yeah.
They said, looks good. And that was.
I'm sorry, I just haven't concentrated on that and looked at the rules.
I'm happy either way.
Okay. I'm sorry if not.
I'm not pushing it in one direction or another. I'm just kind of making this thing
You're right.
happen. And
You're right.
so if the council decides that we want to make this a public body, totally happy to do so, right? If council wants to be CC'd on every single email, sure. It's going to be a lot of extra work for certain individuals, but happy to do it. So.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily have to CC everybody else in this council. It could be, like I said, it could be one member. Like, for instance, you might have some ad hoc committee that sends Stuart out to, we want you to go out and look at new sites for, where we might have the new parade, and, and then you're going to come back and you're going to give us 3 different places that we're going to be looking at so we can make a decision between 3 of them. That little one person, if he gets together with a group of people, That's, I mean, there has to be something more than a committee of one, so at least a committee of two before you have a public meeting, issue.
Well, I'd appreciate being CC. It's one additional person if that's at all possible. I think it's not too hard to do. And from a personal standpoint, I just could never imagine if I'm writing my mayor's newsletter and someone calls me up and says, hey, we want to have a discussion regarding, I don't know, what volunteer to add to the newsletter section this month. And I go, well, and it's Angie. It's, well, Angie, you can't come. We don't want you there. Or Stuart, you know what? You disrupted a meeting some time ago and we don't want you there. Or Baker, nah, he can't come. I mean, I can never imagine saying, hey, somebody in the community can't engage me and have a meeting with my newsletter, whether it be a volunteer or an announcement for something. It would just never happen. So I would ask that our liaison to different groups include members of the community that want to join in and participate, whether on council or not on council. It's just not right to exclude individual members. I'll leave it at that and see how things transpire. And if I'd like to
I have
attend
a question.
if I'd like to attend a meeting, I'd like to go.
I have a question. So,
Yeah.
just so I understand how this all came up.
Yeah.
You guys gathered for a meeting, or a meeting was gathered, Chris came,
No.
you didn't go?
There was no meeting location.
There was no meeting, I mean, what
There
happened?
was
What
one.
triggered this conversation?
It was a
He asked to come to a meeting, and one of the members said they did not want him to come.
No, it's
Okay, okay.
On that note, a few of the members have asked that you not attend the meeting. I'm like,
Okay, so here's where it just boils down to, is I just go logic, I don't care about personality. But logically, I say, okay, if, first of all, is it a public meeting, yes or no, right? Okay, let's say yes, then he can go, right? But if it's no, we're gonna have certain members come to this meeting, that's fine too. How do we choose those members? Who makes that decision? Because it needs to be a neutral-based decision as far as, everybody getting a fair shot, if you will. The whole idea behind the newsletter was to turn it into more of a community newsletter than something that was so controlled by the mayor, just putting it out there. But we wanted, the whole idea was to open it up for the community to be participating and things like that.
Sure.
So if it is that, and in the same step we're excluding people, there seems to be like a trip up there, at least in my head.
I can tell you where the group kind of got boiled down was that's who stepped up, basically, who wanted to take on this
Right.
role, right? And so here I have members who are not interested in working with the mayor, who are
Right.
saying, I'm gonna volunteer to do this thing, but probably not. So,
I'll bet we could look across committees, volunteer opportunities throughout the city and find people that said, you know what, I would be on this or that if it weren't for so-and-so or so-and-so. That's really, it's a tough decision. I don't know. I think that, I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a
Did
tough
I
one.
miss my chance to comment? Because I saw you guys on live stream, got in my car and rolled down here, because this was one of the ones I wanted to comment on.
you may
Did I
comment.
miss it?
You may comment a little bit. You're on the list. That's
Okay,
fine.
all right.
You can get your 3 minutes in there. We're okay. Okay. Any other?
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's like, so those are the people that came, right? So what you're saying is, basically, this is who showed an interest and they showed up to help, but they said they wouldn't help if the mayor was there. And so what we're deciding is whether or not to allow the mayor to go or not? Is that right?
I don't even know what we're trying to decide tonight,
Yeah, that's,
because I told him like a lot
I'm
of.
trying to
our
get
meetings
down to
are
where I
via
can,
email.
logic here a little bit. Yeah, so what are we talking about? Yeah.
No, that's where I'm coming from. I mean, I don't think we can exclude Carolina Marshall from the meeting. I don't think it'd be fair. I don't think we could exclude anybody from a meeting, but that's just my take on it. So I think anyone in the community that wants to be involved in the meeting or attend the meeting or on newsletter should be allowed to attend. I think the liaison should let others know that, hey, we can't exclude people from the community. It's not the right thing to do. You may not have the best feelings towards a particular individual, but hey, they can attend. That's my feelings on it. That's where I'm coming from. I think that it should be completely transparent. Anybody should be able to attend the meeting, be emailed on the meetings. That's my take.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Riddle me this. So the reason when they said they wouldn't come if the mayor was gonna be part of the meeting, was that because of, personal reasons?
Yeah, they thought he was disruptive to meetings.
The what?
He thought he was disruptive to meetings.
But you hadn't had any yet.
No, we've had one, but the mayor's been in other meetings too with this person.
Just put their city council meetings.
Oh.
So, and it's not my decision, right? I didn't say they can't come, I was just.
Let's scrap the whole thing. Anyway, I'm gonna let it go. Do your thing.
No, I'm saying it's really hard. Carolina Marshall, I'll just do 121 West Second Street this time because that's the community center. I was at that meeting and we had a really good time. And Kimberlyn, you know, she just gets that role model of being the hall monitor. We're all over the place and she's like, come on down. And we appreciate you. I love it. I say thank you. And we came up with the Phoenix Voice. And I came up with this really awesome article, which they cut. We'll see
gonna
about
work
next
back.
month. Yes, some of the people that were at the meeting have issues with Chris, and they don't want to meet with him. But I think if we meet in the future, I don't think that's going to really be a big issue. I think we can include everybody. And maybe they won't come, but they can still submit an article because there's this template that we can submit an article to. And Chris writes really beautiful things about the community, and they're going to be getting that newsletter and seeing that. And what I noticed in this newsletter was Chris said, I enjoy doing these things. So he's going to be doing those things, and they're going to see that. And I think what they wanted, and what we want, and what I want, is a newsletter that reflects all of us. And you're right, Terry, we can't not let him come. That's just not going to happen, and we're not going to let it. You know, you're going to be invited. I cannot see. Well, and their feelings have been hurt, and they feel very much betrayed. And we're going to move on because you're the mayor, and we're going to do it. And that's what's going to happen. So I don't think.
My thought is less about it being the mayor and whoever this other person is. I don't care about
And
them.
there's
Honestly,
more.
I don't. What I'm looking at is just the logical progression of selection.
Absolutely.
You know, and how do we be, you know, we did this to be more inclusive, so we're gonna be more inclusive, except for you, and that, you guys, you know, stay out, because we're gonna be inclusive. There's
I just think we
hypocrisy there.
needed that first meeting, and I think we're going to be fine from now on. I really don't think there's going to be an issue, and don't get to submit their clips to Kimberlyn, whatever that is, and we'll get the right amount of words that I'm supposed to do in spaces. It didn't make sense, my little article. That's what I was told. Anyway, but I think it's going to be great, and I think you'll be invited, and I think that it's been difficult for certain people in the community, but I don't think there's going to be an issue. And it's the Phoenix Voice. It's all of us.
We'll get over it. All right.
Over? Did I get like 4 minutes?
Thank you very much.
Did I?
No.
All right. All right, guys, now that we've
Back to agenda.
beaten that horse. Anything else on the newsletter before we move on?
First one came out today. You guys haven't checked your mailbox. On time, thanks to Kimberly.
I got one.
So we're going back to number 9A.
Can I, one more thing?
Yes.
While we're on that newsletter subject, if anyone has anything like this submit to the newsletter, please send it to Kimberlyn or myself and before July 15th.
Oh, is that the deadline, the 15th? No, this time it is the middle of August, because the next one doesn't come out until September. Well, it's actually the first week in August.
First week.
Please, the first week in August.
What's the date?
Oh, you're kidding. That's right. You wanna know? It's going to be, for you, Carolina, it is going to be the 1st of August. Everybody else is dead.
You know how she works.
Anything else, guys? Okay.
I thank Stuart for taking it on. I know you're a busy guy,
All
but
right.
it's great that you've taken it on as liaison.
Well, we're lucky to have good community support.
Yes.
And Kimberlyn.
Yes.
It relieves me from many hours of work, which is. Hey, we're going to go to 9A, and again, it's the first reading by title only of ordinance number 1005, an ordinance of the city of Phoenix adopting amendments to chapter 3.16 of municipal code, second reading, public hearing on July 15, 2019. I did make a comment to Aaron before the meeting. Now, I'd like to see just a brief description on the agenda items saying what that is, because nobody knows what, ordinance number 1005 is. So if it would say regarding Airbnb or the collection of hotel tax, just so I get a brief description so that in the agenda, people that just read the agenda can get an idea of what that means. Okay?
What was that?
Because if community members looking at the agenda and they read that, they like, I've no idea, like we were talking about water rates, SDCs, and then you get down to there, no one knows what that means. But with that said, I'm going to turn to staff. Did you want to have Evan come on?
Sure, yeah, I'd like to have our
Okay.
planning director, Evan.
I gotta apologize, Evan. Evan stayed here until 10 o'clock, the last meeting, to get to talk about this. We never talked about it. Poor guy, he had to go through that whole meeting.
And all of that to come up here to tell you that, Evan McKenzie, Planning Director for the record, by the way, that all we're doing is proposing an amendment that will make the municipal code consistent to the land development code with the changes we made for the hotel, Airbnbs mostly recently, and specifically adding language addressing what they like to be referred to as intermediaries for the purposes of making reservations and, more importantly, collecting the tax and remitting that to the city. We just want to make sure it's very clear that they are responsible to do so. That's it. Any questions?
Less than 1 minute.
That's right.
Okay, discussion. Wow. Okay, so I will entertain a motion.
I move approval ordinance to adopt amendments to chapter 1.3 and 2.2 of the Phoenix Municipal Code.
Second?
And Mr. Mayor, if I may add, the title is actually kind of short on purpose, and that was because, I think this was before you were here, Aaron, but we had one ordinance amendment, and to actually describe it in the title made it so long that it was ridiculous. And so we just said, we're just going to call it amendments to this chapter, mostly for brevity, but I can see where you're coming from, so we'll see if we can find a better
We just
balance in the future.
All right, thank you. Okay, any more discussion? I'm gonna be here by 8 o'clock. Roll call, please.
Counselor Warren?
Yes.
Counselor Crawford?
Yes.
Counselor Baker?
Yes.
Counselor Vermillion?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. We're down to staff reports. City Attorney.
Nothing in particular. I was at the Phoenix High School reunion this weekend, yeah. It was the 50th reunion. My brother came into town, so it's his 50th reunion, but I've got a couple of years to go, just a couple.
Too young for that.
But it was fun, and everyone who was a graduate from Phoenix High School are invited to these things, so it is kind of fun to see all these people that you get to know. So anyway, people I haven't seen in 30 years, 50 years. Brothers, friends, and all those things. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Nothing important. Just
Great. City Manager.
Well, I have a question for the council. I've had because of the 4th of July holiday being on a Thursday, we've had a number of people ask for that Friday off for vacation. As a matter of fact, we've had everyone ask for that Friday off that works in the City Hall building. And I am wondering if the council would object to closing City Hall and allowing everyone to use that as a vacation day. Now, I haven't approved everyone's vacation because I've worked in places where we could not close City Hall. So before I approve that last person's vacation, I want to find out whether or not the council would object to closing City Hall.
I don't object, I got it.
I'd say that's your decision.
Okay, that's,
That's how I see it.
I just want to make sure that the council feels comfortable with that.
Any objections by Counselor?
No, I just wonder about someone coming in to pay their water bill if they would be, in light of the fee increase, if they would have a problem with that, but I'm so for everyone getting a day off on the day after. I want to.
And that has been part of the discussion. You know, I don't recall what traffic was like at City Hall this time last year, but I've been told that the 5th is not a day that is typically very busy anyway, the 5th of the month. Not just because it's after the 4th of July, but that typically people are paying their water bill after that.
Well, what
like
if
next
there
week.
was a problem with that as far as time-wise? Couldn't you just allow some grace there because you're off that day?
They could drop it in the box. So, no objection, it sounds like? Okay.
Then we're good.
Thank you for checking.
By the way,
Except the planning department. Yeah, right.
by the way, I wanted to congratulate Matthias for his promotion to being superintendent of our Public Works Department. Well-deserved, well-earned. You're doing a great job for the city, and keep up the good work. All right? Cool. We're on the table. Mr. Baker, anything?
No, just I like when companies in general promote from within. So I was real happy for you because you're from within, you know. That's all I got.
Mr. Baseball?
I'm good.
Okay.
I just wanted to bring up the question of, do we want to still try to hold a town hall to talk about these fees?
I don't care.
I would like to hear, let's do it.
So if we could try to get a town hall organized, I don't know, in the next month or so, I
Everybody would like that.
think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Had heard a couple people talk about it on the council and outside too. And then just a reminder, Dog Days of Summer is July 20th. And they'll need volunteers if anyone wants to help with that Saturday. I think they're volunteering, we start about 8 for setup and then tear down at around 1 o'clock, somewhere in there.
I'll be there.
Chris will be there, I'll be there. If you're not gonna volunteer, please come hang out. Bring your dog, if you have a dog.
It's a fun event.
And
Who let the dogs
let's
out?
see, my Parks and Rec hat, we have not met for 3 consecutive months, so hopefully this month will be the one. We haven't had quorum to do so yet. I also had someone contact me about illegal fireworks use in the city of Phoenix, and they were concerned about those in town, like the ones that go flying in the air. I know by itself, I've had 2 on my roof last year when I got back. So if we could be vigilant there, it'd be great. And it's also just kind of wondering, update on North Church. We've got a day to break ground yet.
I should have the contract back tomorrow or the following day. The contractor picked it up this morning, so I just need to get signatures. But the start date is anytime after July 1st, so I would expect things are actually moving forward now. Matthias and I met with an arborist and we walked the project. I don't remember if it was last week or the week before. I think it was last week. Yeah, last week. I've been speaking to both the engineer and the architect, and like I said, we got a hard copy of the contracts. Like, it was picked up this morning by the contractor, so I expect to get it back signed, and they'll be working straight away.
Great. Thanks.
Councilor Vermillion?
I have nothing other than, just want to say this is a terrible, hard, great, fun job. All of them.
You say job like we get paid.
I know, volunteer spot, yeah.
Yeah. It's tough making tough decisions sometimes.
It is.
Install it, studying, it's a lot of work, all volunteer.
Just to give you, we're gonna put signs in the parks that say, no fireworks allowed in all parks in the city.
Okay.
Because in the past years, people go in parks and they leave the garbage in the parking lot and kind of make a mess. So this time we're gonna put signs, they're not allowed to.
It's a good idea.
I hope they work.
It worked last year.
Okay.
The police department's good about checking the parks and making sure on the floor, so I think we'll be good.
Okay, thank you. Just one comment on, Aaron and I were in the meeting with all the contractors, and they were opening the bids. And the first bid came out, I think, at like $1.2 million. And I'm thinking to myself, that's way above the $1 million, or when, we're thinking like $1 million, $1.2 million. And the second bid opened up to $900 and something thousand. And I thought, yes, that saves us a ton of money. The other bids were, I think, 1.4, 1.3, 1.5, really, really, really high. So I think the Pilot Rock had the lowest bid.
Correct.
By a lot. And that really helps us out so that we can get our other projects done. It'll be Main Street and another project that we have in mind for this year. That was really exciting to be there and on the meeting.
They're local too.
Mm-hmm.
Buy local, it matters.
Yeah.
Any idea when Main Street?
What's that?
Any idea when Main Street even gets looked at?
Well, I keep talking to Aaron about it, and we're trying, depending on the timing of Church Street, if they get done earlier than we think, then we can do Main Street this year. But I think the theory is, correct me if I'm wrong, is you don't want to have Church Street and Main Street closed down at the same time.
Right.
So you want to finish Church Street first, give a little bit of breathing room, and then do Main Street. So we're trying for the fall. If it's not in the fall, then we'll change Main Street back to 2 lanes, definitely in the spring.
Right,
We have
and
the
the other-
funds to do it.
And we had to have the, I shouldn't say we had to, but what we were hoping was that we could look at those bids for Church Street first. So those would come in and we'd have the bid opening. So we would kind of know what the amount of money for capital projects was going to be, at least have a better understanding. So at this point, we haven't had Main Street engineering work done, but it looks like it won't be an issue of funding, so.
Okay. With that said, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and thank you very much. 7:58.
What about the closed session?